Hi there, and welcome to The Artist's Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we have an outstanding guest with us in studio today. Therese Bartholomew grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and graduated from UNC Charlotte with a master's degree in criminal justice. She teaches at Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte, where she lives with her husband, Doug. Her poetry and essays have been published in Emery's Journal, Iodine, Main Street Rag, and the Charlotte Observer. She promotes various arts and charities in the Charlotte community, including the Tosco Music Party. With the help of fellow local artists, she founded Christmas Outreach, a program dedicated to community service during the holiday season. Therese is also the director of The Final Gift, which we're going to talk a lot about today, which is a documentary film based in part on her book, Coffee Shop God. Thank you very much for joining us in studio today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about Coffee Shop. What is the book about?
A few years back, it's been 6 years now, my younger brother, whom I was very close to, was shot and killed when he was out of town on business. And so the book really started kind of as journals and things like that within a few weeks of his death. Writing had always been something that was really important in my life, and it just became something that I couldn't live without really when he was killed. So what I started doing was writing about my grief, about my depression, about my perspective of things that were going on around us. So the book really starts with the night we got the phone call, finding out that he had been killed, and it goes through about a year and goes up to the actual sentencing hearing of the young man who killed him. So the book really is about grief and loss and forgiveness and all of these things of family that come out in a time like that. You suddenly look around and say, "Oh my gosh, this is who I'm left with." And I know that sounds really harsh, but in reality, that's what we think sometimes when we've lost someone, especially when we've lost someone in a tragic way like that.
Well, you say you began it just a couple of weeks after his death. Did you at that time conceive of it as a book, or were you just writing to get this emotion and this tragedy and the grief and the feelings, down on a page, out of your head, and finding some way to actually process it like therapy?
Well, I think it was mostly the therapy end of it, because I think that I like to tell people that I didn't really choose to write. Writing kind of chose me. Literally woke me up in the middle of the night and, I got to write this down. Found me in coffee shops, just meetings with different people and just feeling like I've got to write this. So a lot of it was that. I didn't really think of what is this going to ultimately be.
When did the idea of a book, when did it begin to kind of coalesce into, okay, it's an in-depth enough writing project that I can put it together as a book?
Well, probably what happened with that is that I just, after doing several of these essays and having very rough drafts of them, I just started thinking, well, this is a collection, and they all just fit. They all just fit together, they blend. You can read one by itself and totally get it, or you can read them all together and they just fit together. So that probably happened, I don't know, a year after I started writing them. But it's funny because people said to me when I finished all the essays and had them put together in a collection, "Oh, you got to write more. You got to write more. It's too short." And interestingly, for me, it's exactly what it needed to be. Not that I won't write more later on,
sure, but
this piece is just exactly what I want it to be, so it's perfect.
How do you feel, Therese, about the book now that it's done? Did it provide closure?
Yes, I would say that it absolutely provided closure. But it's funny because the book for me changes. I do speaking engagements around Charlotte. And one of the things I told a group that I was speaking to a few weeks ago was that, today I really see this book differently. I see that this is a victim voice. This is the voice of someone who's been victimized.
Sure.
And I'm not that person anymore. I mean, I am, but I think part of being victimized is grabbing hold of the voice and embracing it and just saying, this is who I am right now. and then moving into a different place.
Right, and I guess, you know, for a lot of folks in our viewing audience, myself very much included, this is not something that we've experienced, and so the emotions related to a murder like this, to someone that we hold dear, we don't really have anything to draw on. But you know, those emotions of anger and just resentment that this happened, and a sense of you know, a loss that can't ever come back, and that void that's created there certainly is there in the book, and it's not something that I think most people can draw on past experience to relate to. Mm-hmm. What were some of the emotions in the year or two following Steve's death?
Well, definitely a lot of anger, but the anger was not really directed. It was just, I just felt very angry. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was the world. You know, people say, were you angry at God? I really never felt angry with God. It wasn't about that. It was very non-directed. There was a lot of depression, serious depression, and grief, you know, shock. There were all of these things that were going on. And I think that even though people, as you said, you haven't dealt specifically with something like that, a tragic loss like that middle of the night phone call, you've dealt with loss. You know, we've all dealt with loss in some way. And so the book definitely captures that. And I've heard from a lot of people who've read the book, you know, oh, my grandfather died and I just, you know, I felt this way, the way you're talking about in this essay. So it's really amazing how people can connect to it in their own way, which is a real gift for me.
Absolutely, and I think that that's maybe the most positive thing that can come out of writing a book like this, or it's certainly one of the positive things that can come out of it. Certainly processing your own feelings of grief is huge, but that it could be inspiring to other folks to pick up a computer or pen and paper and write down some of these traumatic emotions that they've lived with, that we've all, you know, experienced in one shape or another. If you can inspire folks to do that, and how great is that?
Well, it is, and one of the things that I'm working with the group called Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation, and one of the things that we're talking about doing that I'm really kind of pushing because of the writer in me is let's get these people together and let's teach them how to tell their stories. You know, not necessarily to be published, but just how to voice that, how to claim that victim voice, because I think when you claim it and make it yours and just kind of wallow around in who that is, then you can come out of it. And you can move from being a victim to being a survivor.
Well, you feel like you have some control over the situation by being able to process it.
Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, I think it would be amazing to be able to do that with people.
It's amazing, you know, I think everybody has experienced trauma or you know, tragedy of some sort, but I think you're absolutely right. The process of writing it gives us a sense of assimilation of these memories that we have. Like you said, for the year afterwards, you just had these kind of undirected feelings of anger or anxiety and depression, and yet there was no channel or focus for you to put it all into one specific, you know, book or essay. But through the process of writing it, it sounds like you come to some sort of sense of, okay, well, this essay is there. It's a snapshot of what I was feeling about the situation. And I think that is what growth is all about, it seems like.
It is, and I think it's interesting that you said snapshot, because there were moments, and I even talk about this in a few of the essays, moments where I was literally driving down the highway, you know, after seeing, you know, autopsy photos, driving down the highway and grabbing out a pen and just sitting on the side of the highway and writing down 2 sentences about what I saw. And it wasn't that I said, oh, I'm going to pull over and write this now. It was that I had no choice. That was my way of getting all of that yuck, all that really dirty
all the
stuff.
Negative emotions involved.
Yeah, I mean, getting it out on paper. Sure. And when I pulled over on the side of the road, I wasn't thinking, oh, this is going to turn into an essay. I'm going to get this published. It wasn't about that. It was more about, I've got to get this out. I've got to get this negative stuff out, because if I don't, it's going to linger in my mind.
Yeah,
I'm going to have images. Yeah. And
well, I think it's a great point, and it leads to something that I've asked a lot of writers, and when I do events at bookstores, that kind of thing, aspiring writers have questions about, and that is, well, how do you, in a memoir, end up selecting the scenes or settings that are, you know, specific to a book? How did you go about saying, okay, well, I've got all these emotions, all these images, all of this memory from this experience and from your life, you know, how did you end up selecting something for inclusion in the book?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's obviously a really challenging process, because one of the things is that when we write something, we tend to think, this is my baby. You know, maybe it's a line, maybe it's a verse, maybe it's a paragraph, whatever. But we get really attached to that piece because it's part of who we are. If it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever, it doesn't matter. I think memoir is even more so that way, because it's really literally part of who you are. So it's a hard process to kind of dig through that, to sift through it. And I guess the best thing I can say about that is that I think that what we do is we let go of certain pieces and we hold on to them. I mean, I have a basket, literally a basket, like a laundry basket, full of writing on scraps of paper, on napkins from bars, whatever I have, bills, whatever I've just written something on. And I keep all that because I believe all of that will eventually turn into something. So I save it because it's still part of who I am. So those pieces that I don't pull out and say, oh, this is perfect for this essay, those pieces are going to come to life somewhere else, you know, in another book or another essay or another poem.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago, Therese, about Murder Victims Families for Reconciliation, the organization. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure people in our viewing audience might be interested in that and finding some way to either volunteer or become a part of the organization. Just, you know, look it up online and see what it's all about. So how did you first become aware of the organization?
Well, first I want to say that my prayer is that with the film and the book that I'm going to be able to use this to help all of these different people. People say, well, where do you want the book to go? Well, gosh, I want everybody to have the book because I think it can mean something to people. And so with that, one of the things I did was with the film, I tried to connect with different filmmakers who were local people. And one of the women that I just happened to connect with is Linda Booker. And she did a documentary, Love Lives on Death Row. And I went to view the documentary. I drove to Durham to view it. And I just so happened to run into John Comer, who is the coordinator for MVFR in North Carolina. So I ran into him and we started talking, and he said, oh, I want to hear about your book, I want to hear about your film, whatever. And so we just connected, and it's an organization that really tries to give voice to victims, and I think it's so important for victims to have a voice, and to have the voice to be able to move on, to, especially in a situation with murder. You know, you're talking about people who've been harmed in the worst way possible, you know, been victimized. You know, they're family members of the victims, but they are victims. You know, we are victims.
How instrumental was NVFR in your own processing of the grief, and what ways was it instrumental? Obviously, you had the documentary that came as a result of the networking and meeting, you know, folks through the organization, but what other ways was it instrumental in processing the grief?
Well, I think that again, it's about voice. You know, I know I keep saying, but I think that's so important. And one of the things that John told me is that, you know, we want you to be, we want you to have a voice. We want you to get a hold of things. And I only met John and connected with the organization this past fall. So the documentary was already well in the works. The book was on its way out. You know, I was fortunate in that they sent my husband and I both to a meeting in Pennsylvania with all of these different victims, family members. I mean, it was incredible to just be with all these people who have such powerful stories and such powerful voices, to be surrounded by that. And one of the people I met there was Sister Helen Progine, who wrote Dead Man Walking.
Which I'm sure folks are familiar with.
Yes.
They're watching the show.
And I'm telling you, I've always admired her work. You know, that's one of my all-time favorite films, just because of the subject matter and the idea that humanity can be so twisted and raw, but we can still be okay. We can still forgive one another. We can still move on. And the idea that she worked with these people who were on death row and people who were victimized by the people on death row. And so I'm telling you, when I met her, that was like one of the highlights.
I can only imagine. So what is the organization, and where can folks who are watching our show tonight go to find out about the organization?
Well, they can definitely go to the website, which is www.mvfr.org. They can definitely go there and check that out and get additional information. But the organization is really focused on that idea of reconciliation, on helping people get to a place that they can reconcile what's happened in their life, the tragic event that's brought them into this circle of people, and hopefully come to some sense of forgiveness with the person who committed the crime. And I know a lot of people say, oh, how can you forgive? We all can. It's amazing what we're actually capable of. It's amazing to me, because I never in a million years would have said that I would forgive someone who did something like this in our life. Never. But here I am, and I wholeheartedly forgive. And the truth is, that's a very freeing thing for people. It's a very, very freeing thing. If you hold on to all that stuff, I tell my kids, if you hold on to all this negative stuff, it's like a glass of water that's full. There's no room for anything else to come into it. There's no room for the good stuff in life. You got to get rid of the negative to get in any of the positive.
And it sounds like a lot of writing the book and the essays behind it, some that probably weren't included, some that were included, was a big part of the process towards arriving at the moment when you could find forgiveness in your heart for this guy who had done this to your brother.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a process, just like the writing is a process. Forgiveness is a process. You don't just wake up and go, oh, I'm totally forgiving him, that's fine.
Did you arrive at a moment, though, where you said, okay, I think I'm ready to forgive this guy for what he'd done?
Well, as odd as this sounds, one of my essays actually talks about the first time I saw him. And it was within weeks of my brother's death that I saw his killer in a courtroom. And my first instinct, of course, was, okay, I'd really like to kill this guy. And I actually thought it through.
Sure.
I thought, what happens if I jump over this bar in the courtroom and I just grab this guy? What if I just start beating on him? I mean, I imagine myself doing that. And then within minutes of that, I started to see him differently. Suddenly, I just saw him as a human being, as potentially my brother. He was young. He was 22. My brother was 33 when he was killed. I was a high school teacher at the time. I looked at him and I thought, God, this could have been one of my troubled kids that I loved. What if someone would have come into his path and changed something for him, or redirected, or, not to place blame on people, but you just wonder. And I sat there wondering all this in the courtroom, staring at his back. His back says inmate across it, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is just somebody's son. This is somebody's brother, So it was almost immediate that I felt that. Now, it wasn't that, again, it is a process. So it wasn't that I just said, oh, I forgive him and I'm done. I mean, like every day I have to wake up and go, I'm going to forgive this guy.
You really just live with it.
You do. You always live with it.
Well, for our folks who are just tuning in, the guest is Therese Bartholomew. The book is Coffee Shop God, which deals with the topic of the book really is her brother Steve's murder, and the process that she went through to come to some sort of reconciliation about that, and really about, I guess, kind of life's purpose, ultimately. How does something like this affect, we all live with the idea that, or at least we want to believe, that our life has meaning and purpose, that we're here for some reason that maybe we can't fully comprehend, but that we're here for something, and that our life has some sort of ultimate destiny. Certainly that's an innate, drive for a lot of folks. How does something like this affect that kind of innate desire to want to believe that life has purpose and meaning, or does it?
Well, I think it definitely does, and I think it really even has made me even more strongly feel the need to find what that calling is. I think that, before my brother died, one of the things, probably a month before he died, one of the things he said to one of my cousins when he was having a conversation was, my husband and I had just gotten married, and it was You know, it was just crazy. He had kids and I had kids, and it was just craziness. And my brother said to my cousin, what I really want is for my sister to be happy. And after he died, those words went through my mind continually. I want my sister to be happy. I want my sister to be happy. And that the film is titled The Final Gift. And to me, part of that is a gift to my brother. You know, okay, look at me, I'm happy, everything's fine. And it's not faking it. It's not about faking it. It's about finding it. It's about finding some sense of purpose. And I believe that we're all faced with different challenges in our life. I mean, maybe you haven't had a loved one killed, but you've had challenges. We all have, you know. And so we're faced with all these things, and the choice comes in with not necessarily things we actually face, because sometimes we don't want them. We don't choose them, you know, but we do choose what we do with that afterwards. And that's what we decide what the purpose in all that is. We choose it.
Well, it just seems like the best possible way to respond to tragedy like this. You know, again, it's not something that I have experienced myself to this degree, and I'm sure a lot of folks watching the show tonight probably haven't experienced something like this. And my initial thought was, if something like this happened, it would totally bring into question the idea of purpose in life. If something completely violent and random like this can happen to somebody that you know, it seems like that would really call into question, well, what was the purpose of his life if it was taken from him in such a random kind of way?
Well, and that's one of the things that I've questioned even in some of my essays that are published and non-published, is this idea that, you know, what is the point of all this? I mean, one of my journal entries from within days of you know, him being killed was something to the effect of, why is this happening? Is this somehow to make me a better person? Because I'm going to be really pissed off if that's the case. You know, I mean, seriously, we do, and that was some of the anger that comes out is, you know, why in the world would something like this happen? And if it's for me to have personal growth, I don't need personal growth. No thanks. I'll just take my brother back. You know, so trying to find a purpose in that, but also just realizing, you know, for me, one of the things that I've realized through this entire process is that we are so not in control of what, you know, what our lives are going to be. We do make choices. Obviously, that young man who killed my brother made a choice, you know, one that will cost him for the rest of his life, you know. So we do make choices, but, you know, I just think we decide what we're going to do afterwards, you know, and we decide what the purpose and all of that stuff is and what good can come of that.
Well, the book is Coffee Shop God. The guest is Therese Bartholomew. We're kind of getting into some of the heavier sort of, I guess, questions that arise when something like this happens. I do want to talk a little bit about the documentary film, The Final Gift. We've mentioned it a couple of times. Where did the idea for that first begin, The Final Gift?
Well, as I said, writing kind of chose me in a lot of ways. It wakes me up. All great ideas wake me up in the middle of the night. And so I literally sat up in bed. It's probably a year after my brother was killed. I sat up in bed and I woke my husband and I said, I'm going to make a film. And he said, okay. At that point, I think he was so relieved for any idea that came to my mind that would get me out of bed every day. He was just thrilled with that because I was in such a horrible place. Well, the thought really never occurred to me. I don't have a camera. I don't know anything about film. Those questions, who cares about that stuff, right? I just felt very driven to make a film. And so the next morning I talked to him about it. I emailed a couple of friends who were writers, and I said, do you guys want to make a film? And they said, absolutely. And none of us had a clue what we were doing. So it was very naive, to say the least, but the film has grown and grown and grown, and now all these people around me who are just amazing people, not just filmmakers, but amazing people who have heard the story and said, we want to help you tell the story. And the idea that woke me up in the middle of the night was the notion that I've got a voice. There's my voice, you know, I've got it. It's all wrapped up in this pretty little package. It is the victim voice. But what I don't have is an understanding of who the killer genuinely is. What is his story? What was his life like? You know, what is life like for him now? What will it be like for him in the future? You know, and I wanted to give him that. I wanted to give him a voice. And so that's the goal of the documentary.
Again, it's just an absolutely fascinating story and inspiring as well. You know, it makes me really curious about what your thoughts are on your background and experience in life that led to this kind of positive response to this. Certainly folks in our viewership can imagine, and you can as well, in certain instances where something like this happens, the response would be to jump across that bench, you know, maybe 3 months later or 6 months later, and often the response to violence like this in other parts of the country as well as here in the United States is to let it fester and then calculate some sort of violent response to it. What about your background, Therese, said, that's not the direction I want to go with this. I want to do something creative with this to process it and potentially inspire, hundreds and hundreds of others to do so.
Well, first of all, I have to thank my parents for that, because my parents are these amazing people who just kind of love without boundaries. My parents have always kind of taken in people from the streets, people who needed things. Just their home was just open. And they were very compassionate people, especially my mother. So I think that I definitely already had been raised with that kind of mentality. But it's funny because it's like people say, and this is very true, you don't really ever know how you're going to respond. You can say, oh, I've been set up for this path, I've been set up for this. But you really don't ever know exactly how you're going to respond when you're really faced with that thing that's floating around out there. So I think I was really fortunate in being raised by people who were compassionate, who believed in the value of life and the value of human beings, regardless of who they were and whether or not they were, welcome in society as a whole, or it didn't matter. And my older brother was in and out of prison all of his life, So I kind of had dealings with all sides of things. And as much as that's been challenging many times in my life, very challenging, to have the drug dealing brother and the parents who kind of open their arms to everybody and all of this, it's been really challenging. But at the same time, wow, it's been rich. I'm grateful, because I would not be the person I am without all of these experiences.
Well, and it just sounds like, and we're coming down to our last minute here, but it just sounds like you had reached a point in your life where you said, okay, this kind of stuff, this kind of nonsense, this kind of, just negative behavior is just, I'm done with it, and it's time for me to start making choices to do something good with life. Well, I wish we had a little bit more time, but we're just about out of time for today. The book is Therese Bartholomew, or the book is Coffee Shop God. The author is Therese Bartholomew. I want to thank you very much for joining us in studio today.
Thank you so much. And if anybody's interested in the documentary, the website is www.thefinalgift.com.
Thefinalgift.com. Yes. For all of us here at the Raleigh Television Network, Michael and Marnie working very hard in the back, I want to thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it does fly by.
It does, and that was so easy. You're awesome. You're great.
Well, thank you. We've been doing this a while now. We had Michael Connelly.